So before we dive into the PowerPoint, what I want to do is just, whoopsie, this is in the way, get on the way.
Well, I'm a bit busy.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Oh, hold on, I just want to go to Daymat. All right, so if you just look at the screen, I'm just going to show you some different resources that you can access for this very important assessment. So, can we mute?
Yeah, just do that.
Okay, are we all looking at the screen or at your own Daymat? Either or. Okay, so the first resource is the PowerPoint that we are about to go through. Okay, so if you ever need to refer back to that, I'll just leave it there for you. The next one is a PDF document. It says workbook, which relates to sort of like a planning workbook. It's like 50 odd pages. It goes through the different stages of how you can do. The next one is investigation document. So it's very similar to the PDF planning aspect, except you can actually type into PDF. It's not just PDF, so you can work through it. That's the one I'd like to use. But if you need more information or more help, that's what the PDF is for. Then we've got external investigation. That is your actual like assessment sheet, if you will, which looks a little bit like this. Wants to load for me. What's it called? External.
What is it?
Yeah. So it looks like. Please open. There we go. Right, so it's just your plain Jane. Oh, now about 6 are going to open. It's your plain Jane assessment task with all the bits of boring bits of information and your rubric. Okay. So the PowerPoint. Then we're going to go through the next one, and etc. etc. All right. So last year for your investigations, you chose your own topic. Is that right? Okay. No. Can't do that. Okay. So it's actually going to be very similar this year. Like you choose your own topic, but there are a couple of things we want to talk about before we get into it. So the first thing is that it is 30%. So it's a very large portion of your grades. Just to break it down for you, your external is 30%. Your practical application, so all the things that we produce on your own, such as the cooking thing that we've just done, the book project, that all of those assignments actually equal 50%. So it is that's the biggest chunk, if you will, but it's broken into smaller assessments. And then you've got your group activities, which I think I initially had 2, but I'm now going to change it to 1 just because group activities is going to be really hard for the rest of the year. So looking at it in that sort of sense, it looks like the practical application is the most, then we've got the external investigation, then we've got group. But if you break it down into each assessment, right, group assessment is 10%, practical assessment is 12.5%. So that's a very small fraction of your grade for one assessment. Your external assessment is 1 assessment, and that's how big of a chunk it is. So if you get A's for this and a C for that, it's going to bring your whole grade down massively. Right, so I just wanted to show you how big this assessment is, not to stress you out, not to overwhelm you, but it is important that we do put a lot of effort, time into it, because a lot of our other assessments we do kind of burn through really quickly because it's quite time. We don't have a lot of time in year 12, but we do need to spend a fair bit of time. So it is my expectation that you do spend some holiday time on this. So hopefully you'll be at home, relaxing, isolating. Okay, so hopefully I do want you to take some time in the holidays for yourselves, and I do want you to recharge and get your well-being back to where it needs to be. But it is my expectation that you do chip away at your investigation as well. Doesn't mean that you're starting to write it. I'm not expecting anybody to write their investigation in the holidays. I'm expecting you to collect information, to do research. okay, to do surveys, to do interviews. Face-to-face interviews can be really difficult now, so phone interviews are absolutely fine, even if it's just like an email interview. You know, if you find someone that's willing to answer 10 questions of yours, you've got 10 questions and they send through responses, I would consider that to be an interview, okay? So what you are doing, very similar to last year, is you are identifying a relevant and contemporary issue related to an area of study within child studies. Okay, so there's 5 different areas of study for you to choose from. Last year there would have been 3. Okay, so there's a little bit more now, and we'll go through them a little bit later today. So you pick an area of study, you define the scope of the study, like age group that you're focusing on, if there's a particular socio-economic demographic that you're looking at, if there's a specific culture that you're looking at. You know, if you are actually going to refine your research to a particular area, you would need to explain that. You're going to analyse information. You're going to do, obviously, referencing, that's obvious. You're going to evaluate and you're going to make conclusions from your research, and it's 2,000 words. So how long was your investigation last year?
1,000.
That's really interesting. I'm really confused about that.
No, it's like 600.
600?
600.
It's the same, yeah, it's 600 in stage 1.
Then 2,000.
So you've got a lot of words. All right. Doesn't mean that you have to meet 2,000 words, but you would not want to be under 1,800. Okay, so trying to use as much information as you can to get to that word count, because the more words you have, realistically, the more in-depth your investigation can go. Okay, so these are your performance standards. So this is what I'm grading you on. So when you get your grade, I'm going to grade you on 4 different things. So first, I grade you on your overall investigation. So that actually can, the word investigation, I can grade lots of different ways. So by that, I can look at your reference list and I can say, right, they've got 5 references. Their investigation is at a C or a D, okay? Maybe if you've got 12 resources, you've got a really good investigation. You've actually gone and visited a lot of different sources, you've done a lot of research, your actual investigation has been in depth. Okay, then I mark you on your critical analysis. So how critical are you being? Are you just making, you know, willy-nilly statements? Are you not actually looking at data? Is it just a bit plain Jane? All right, it needs to be contemporary. So to gauge whether or not it's contemporary doesn't mean it has to be 2020 or 2019. It could probably be 5 to 6 years old, and anything over that, you'd be thinking maybe it's a bit too old. If you're looking at the comparison of modern versus however many years ago, that's fine, okay? If you're comparing old versus new, but you don't want to be focusing on issues that were from like 10 years ago, because everything changes so quickly now in our society. If we think about 2010, how old were you guys when you were in 8? Right? How different was everything when you were 8? So much changes in 10 years, which is why we want to keep it within that 5-year sort of bracket. Okay, and it does need to relate to the health and well-being of children. Some topics can sort of lead away from that, which can be fine, but as long as one of your focus questions enables you to look at the health and well-being of children, then you should be able to tick that box. Okay, your analysis of information for relevance and appropriateness. So if you're talking about like adolescents, teenagers, is that relevant? Is it appropriate? Probably not, because we're looking at 0 to 8 years old. If it's just a comment about how it might impact them later in life, that's still relevant. But you don't want to be focusing on those sorts of aspects. You don't want to be focusing on how, you know, trauma at a young age impacts someone when they're an adult. You would want to be talking about how it impacts them at 8 years old. That's as old as you'd want to get. And then appropriate acknowledgement of sources. So it is, I'm going to put my foot down and say that you do have to reference throughout, whether that be footnote, whether that be in text, up to you, so whatever your preference is, but it does need to happen. If I do see, you know, a sentence that you've clearly gotten from somewhere else, I would like to know where you get it from, whether it's a credible resource, like if it's just Wikipedia, probably not great. All right, but making sure that you are referencing properly. Oops, did it again. And I might even try, if I can get my videos to upload to DayMap, I might even do a similar scenario where we go through referencing. If you're not very confident with that, you can choose whether or not you want to watch that video instead of wasting everyone's time. And then application of literacy and numeracy. So everyone should be using numeracy throughout your investigation. So that can be in the form of using like statistics. If you choose to do like surveys, you collect data, you then collate the data, and then you would then analyze the data. So you are actually using numeracy skills in that process anyway. So I'm thinking it should be a fairly simple box to tick, but it's not just plonking in a graph and then being like, right, I've ticked numeracy. You would actually have to talk about what that information is telling everybody and how it's relevant to your investigation. Then your evaluation pretty much is like your conclusion. So how is everything overall answering your question? So it's pretty much you're just evaluating. I mean, you're investigating, right, and critically analysing contemporary trends. So that's your investigation, and then right at the bottom, you need to evaluate, the contemporary trends, blah blah blah. So it's pretty much just like how well overall you evaluate everything. All right. So primary, secondary sources, just giving you a bit of a gauge, like a C could be anywhere from 5 to 7 resources. If you've got less than 5, you'd be looking at probably a D. 7, depending on how credible and how good the resources are, 7 is a good amount for a C. B might be 8 to 11 resources. A might be 11 plus, okay? For some people's research tasks that we've just done, some people had 11 resources, okay? So it might just mean the more resources that you have, the bigger perspective you get, and you get to see different viewpoints. You would see a lot of information that contradicts with itself. So it's actually really good to get a larger amount of resources for that reason. And then you can actually see, oh, well, this is probably more true than that. Or this resource is more credible than this one because this is just a bloody Twitter or whatever. Some willy-nilly person has just said something. I don't know. Right. So, yeah, we talked about primary sources. That could be surveys, interviews. So it could be a transcript of of a phone call. You might record it on your phone. Could be emails. And interviews should be with professionals. So don't interview parents and caregivers. I would survey those people. All right. So I would interview people that are experts in their field. So looking at teachers, looking at psychologists, looking at doctors, pediatricians, nurses, perhaps. You could be looking people that see things every day and are experts in their field. All right. Surveys could be parents, could be caregivers, could be teachers because you've got exposure to a lot of teachers. Okay. If you guys have a survey that you want to be filled out with parents, you've got a whole class of people that have parents that you can just, can you get your mum or dad to do this, or both? Okay. Or get your auntie and uncle to do this, or whatever. Okay. So we can help each other in that sense with surveys. And just remember that it can take time to get information back from people. Getting in early and allowing plenty of time to collect primary research is a good strategy. So just a quick show of hands, who found it difficult to collect primary resources for their research project? I did when I was in year 12. I found it really hard. I felt like people... Okay.
I couldn't do primary sources.
Why? What were you...
It was unethical.
It was unethical. Oh, interesting. Okay, maybe you would learn not to do a question. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So looking at the time that we have to do our investigation, we've got about 2 weeks of school, 2.5, maybe, pretty much 2. We've got 2 weeks of holidays, and then I think I give you maybe like 3 or 4 weeks next term, maybe 3 weeks next term. So you've got about 7 weeks to do your investigation. But that just means that once those 7 weeks are up, we move on to our next assessment. So if you're not ready to submit your investigation, it's not due until like September or October to SACE. So that just means that behind the scenes, you're chipping away, we're drafting it. It just means that if you don't get it in within that 7 weeks, You'll just have your investigation alongside your other assessment, okay? And that might be something that happens because a lot of people aren't at work. They might not be checking their emails. Thanks, girls. They might not be checking their, they might not be checking their emails as regularly, or they might not be picking up the phone because they're not in the office. But as soon as you have an idea of what you want to do for your investigation, as soon as you've identified a range of different professionals that you could potentially interview, just send out a whole bunch of emails and see who gets back to you. Okay, the sooner you do that, the sooner people could get back to you and the sooner you could collect that information. Okay, but it is a good idea to have surveys as a backup. Try and have one survey and try and have one interview. Therefore, if the interview falls through, you've at least got your survey to fall back on. Okay, as a primary resource. Is there a question?
Yeah. Do you mark it or is it SACE that marks it?
I mark it, and then SACE also marks it, and then they.
That's how it works, isn't it? You mark the piece. Don't tell us what we got from you. That's what Miss Eliana said about the investigation.
Didn't know that. Sure, won't tell you.
I'm not sure.
I could do your draft. I'm going to do your draft, and I'm not going to say, oh, well, this is. Yeah. This is a. I'm not going to tell you that it's an A if it's not. Like if I see your draft to say, right, this is a C. This is what you need to do to get it up to a B or an A. I'm very comfortable doing. I feel like it's a very appropriate part of feedback.
Like drafting. I don't know.
Yeah.
She was saying something like she's not allowed to tell us what we got until the end of the year because SACE gives it out.
Well, that's only because my grade isn't necessarily going to be your grade.
That's true.
So I could say I think this is a B plus. Could come back as a B minus. Could come back as a B. Could come back as a B plus. Could come back as an A minus. It could be moderated, but that's why I want to get your investigations in before term 3 because it actually takes a really long time to grade because I have to make sure that my grading is spot on so that it doesn't get moderated, so that your grade that you get stays that way, so it doesn't go down. It goes up, but I don't want it to go down. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. Right, areas of study. So some different sort of topics, I guess, if you will. All right. First one is contemporary and future issues. So anything to do with what's happening now, anything to do with maybe potential problems or positive things that could be happening in the future. So that could be related to global issues on the development of children. So, I mean, something current that's happening right now is, there's a lot of debate about schools being open. Little kids 8 years old go to school. Okay, there's early childhood centres. Are there any issues happening around that? Maybe in terms of health or development. If children and young children are being kept in social isolation at home, how might that impact their social, emotional development? Are they missing out on any important cognitive development by being left at home? A lot of really important learning does happen in early childhood centres. They're not just babysitting places. They don't just watch the kids play all day. They actually have strict programs that promote a range of different learning. Okay, so are the kids going to be accessing that education while they're at home for however many weeks, however many months? Is that going to put a dent in their development? That could be something that somebody looks at. Looking at contemporary issues related to health, well-being, nutrition. That's always a popular topic. Looking at safety. Whether you could be looking at cyber safety, or kids at young ages, playing, Minecraft or whatever. I don't know much about Minecraft, but I think there's like young versions of that, and I think you can chat to people and stuff like that. You could be looking at little children on TikTok. Are there potential predators on TikTok? Okay, what are the safety things around that? Maybe looking at education, identity, and just literacy and numeracy. Looking at overweight children. It's always a popular topic because there's always overweight children. Genetic and lifestyle factors. So does anyone want to have a go at what the difference between genetic and lifestyle factors are?
Genetic is being born with the issue, lifestyle factors is growing up and kind of gaining it as you grow.
Yeah, okay. So genetic is something that we don't really have control over. It's something that we're born with. So what might an example of that be?
Down syndrome.
Yeah.
Is it? Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, no,
it's something you're born with. You can't change it.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
All right. Could be diabetes. It could be that you genetically find it really difficult to maintain a low weight. Okay, sometimes that is genetic. If a child's parents are overweight or obese, it actually increases the likelihood of their children being overweight and obese. It actually becomes a part of their genetics. So health could be in there. It could be that dad's not very good with numbers. He might be dyslexic with numbers. That could be something that's genetically passed down. Okay, lifestyle factors is more of a choice. Okay, so little children as such necessarily don't get to choose their lifestyle. It's whatever their parents are that's what their lifestyle is, they bring onto their children. But it is much more a choice. There are a lot more variables. There are so many different combinations of lifestyles. So looking at how those two different things can impact child development and health. So that's one topic. Can we think of any other areas to do with anything contemporary or future issues? Anybody seen on the news? No. Virus. That's very contemporary. Very contemporary. Maybe there's always looking at that's probably going to lead into a different area. I'll wait for that. Economic and environmental issues. So creating and maintaining a safe environment for children, whether that be physical safety, emotional safety. So you could be looking at domestic abuse or violence in the home. It could be, what are the environments like in foster care? Are they safe for children? Stuff like that. Are rural countries safe for children? I don't know. I'm very metropolitan my entire life, so you could be looking at rural. If you know anybody that lives rural, you could maybe, I was going to say you could maybe visit someone, but borders are closed. Oops. The role of resources in supporting the needs of children. So you could be looking at special needs children. So looking at autism spectrum disorder, fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. You could be looking at Down syndrome. You could be looking at children with dyslexia, children who struggle with emotional regulation. What resources are out there to support these children? What education is out there for parents, members of the community? Are we well enough educated as a community about these different things to think, oh, maybe this person isn't, dumb. Maybe they just have a learning disability that there's not a lot of education about. People are born the way that they are. They struggle with things. It doesn't mean that they're less than, but do we have that education in our community? And how is that impacting the development of children? Are they growing up with a positive identity of themselves, thinking, this is something that I struggle with? Everybody has something that they struggle with. This is just what I struggle with. Is that something that they're growing up with? The food and nutritional requirements of children, supporting healthy eating, again, a very popular topic, very easy topic. So if you were to choose something to do with nutrition, you would really want to fine tune that into something that's maybe a little bit more contemporary. Maybe like new food products that are coming out. I don't know, maybe veganism. Is that good for young children? Is it going to be detrimental to their health and their development? Are they getting the nutrients that they need? Looking at environmental influences. What are environmental influences? Looking at a children's environment, a child's environment. We're looking at, their home. Okay, so we're not talking about global warming. We're not talking about sustainability. We're talking about their everyday environment that they are in and exposed to, so their home. So the influence of poverty on a family and community structures, how is that going to impact the development of children or the health of children? All right, political and legal influences, so looking particularly at just legislation. So looking at Commonwealth government legislation that supports and empowers parents and families in caring for children. I have no idea what you could do for that, but I'd be interested to see if someone figures it out. Support services that promote the well-being of children with special needs. We could be looking at the Disability Discrimination Act. Is it still, is discrimination in, childcares and schools and stuff like that still present? Looking at the accessibility of community services and networks. So you might even look at a rural town and whether or not children that have a range of different disabilities or learning needs can actually be supported in their home, in their rural towns, or do they have to come to metropolitan areas, which are generally a lot more expensive, a lot harder to get jobs in? So can children be supported in those rural areas? rights of children, parents, caregivers, and childcare workers. I thought, you know, you could even tie into that the rights of caregivers and childcare workers right now. You know, a lot of people are having to go to school and early childhood centres and could potentially be exposed to this virus because the government is keeping it open. Is that something that you'd be interested in looking at? Are there a lot of angry people out there, or are they fine with it, or what are they struggling with, and how is that going to impact children, stuff like that? And media, you could look at anything to do with media and how it impacts the health and well-being of children, how it impacts their self-identity, how it impacts, you know, what's it called? Gender identity, I guess. You know, boys wear blue, girls wear pink. That's still very much present in today's media. Looking at, what is it? You cry like a girl or something like that, throw like a girl, stuff like that, because it's still present in today's media. Our children still growing up with that idea of what is girl, what is boy, how is that impacting them. Socio-cultural influences, so family structures and environments, looking at diverse communities, looking at a whole range of development here. Looking at the role of play, looking at diet, again, diets in a lot of different ones. Oh, there's gender and group identity. You could look at cultural inclusivity. Is that happening for young children today? Yes, no, how can it be improved? What is that bottom one? The development of empathy, respect, and inclusivity of a range of cultures. So are people coming from international countries, and are they finding it safe and comfortable here? Can little children thrive in our schools? Are we supporting them enough? If they've got a language barrier, is that something that our schools are looking at? Technological influences, anything to do with technology fits into this bubble. So that could literally be medical advancements. So if you're looking at preemie babies, if you want to look at what sorts of technology is supporting the health and development of premature babies. You could be looking at maybe the debate between should children be vaccinated. That's always a very popular topic. There are a lot of people out there that don't believe that vaccinations are necessary, because before there were vaccinations, there weren't vaccinations, and everybody was fine. So you could be looking at that and trying to find different. You could even, you know, interview doctors and pediatricians and find a range of different people to interview about that. You know, do parents get their children vaccinated because they're told to, or because they believe in it? Do they just do it because they think it's what everybody else does, or do they really believe that it's important? The use of technology to meet a child's specific physical or emotional needs, the impact of local and global media on the development of children, the influence of licensing and standards, regulations on health and well-being. So like, I think that's in relation to like adverts and what's appropriate during certain times of day. Impact of emerging technologies on the health and well-being of children. You could be looking at screen time, you could be looking at social media, you could be looking at, what else? Right. Anything to do with technology, really. Pretty broad. All right, so 5 pretty broad topics. You don't necessarily need to go through the topics and then find a question. You could do it backwards. You could have a question that you really want to do, and then you just figure out which area it fits into. But it has to fit into one of those 5 topics, okay? If it doesn't fit into one of those 5 topics, we might have to just tweak it a little bit so that it does, okay? And that might be when we come up with some focus questions. So some questions for you to consider when you choose your topic is it relevant? All right, is it relevant to child studies? Is it relevant to 0 to 8 years old? Is it relevant to one of those 5 areas of study? You have yes for all of those questions? Great, all right. Is it contemporary? Is it something that's happening now? Is it something that is being talked about within the last 5 years? Or is it a bit old and dated, okay? Has it really been talked to death? Is it possible to gather enough primary, secondary sources? So really have a think about, can you interview anyone? Can you interview multiple people? Can you get surveys? Is it going to be, are you going to be able to access members of our community to get those primary resources? Something that you really do want to think about. How strongly is it related to your area of study? So are you just saying it's related to this area of study because you really want to do this question, or is it actually genuinely related to that topic? And are you passionately interested in it? I'm sure you've heard this to death in research project. If you are not interested in it, you are going to struggle to do it, okay? So do try to pick something that you're interested in. Try to pick something that you know you can get information about, because if you pick something that you think is just going to be easy, and that's why you've chosen it, you're going to find it really difficult to do, especially when we only have about 7 or 8 weeks to do it. Okay. All right, some advice. This is some advice from me and some advice from Stace. So make sure it's relevant, make sure it's contemporary, make sure it relates to the health and wellbeing of children, make sure it interests you, make sure that it is original and innovative. So try not to pick a generic question. Sometimes you can get away with Googling different child studies topics and lots of random things actually do come up, but try to pick something that hasn't been sort of done before. Try to pick something that is unique, you know, something that you really want to find out, because the more original it is, probably the better grade you'll get from SACE. Develop effective time management skills. So have a plan, okay? So that's going to be something that we work through with our little Word document. Is you plan all your different resources, you plan, you know, in which week am I going to do this? You know, do I need to have all of my surveys in by the end of the holidays so that I can collect and do my data? How do I get my data into grids and tables? If you're not familiar on how to do that, you know, how are you going to be familiar with that? So just having a plan and having maybe a schedule of when you're going to get things done. What else? Develop focus questions to help answer your overall question, like you would have done a research project. Use both primary and secondary sources. Ask for help and support. Email me anytime, all the time. An email a day, 3 emails a day, I don't care. Email me, especially now that school's potentially not going to be open, okay? Email me through the holidays. I'll be on my laptop through the holidays. I will be able to respond to you. Even if it takes me a day or 2 days, I will get back to you. So draft your investigation, that's really important. Back up your work. Who uses a USB for their Year 12 work? Who uses their laptop to save their work? Just their laptop.
I use OneDrive. Yeah, me too.
Okay, who uses OneDrive or Google Docs? I would like, in particular for this investigation, for everybody to either do a Google Doc or OneDrive, because if you lose your USB or if your computer craps itself, you're essentially screwed, okay? And then you're going to have a child studies assignment constantly happening, plus you're going to have your investigation in the background. So I would really advise that you back it up somewhere, whether it's Google Docs, OneDrive, whatever you prefer, whether it's 3 USBs, whatever works for you. All right. If you're knocked back for an interview, which probably could happen, just keep trying for another one. Adelaide, we have lots of different experts in lots of different fields. Someone is bound to be interested, especially with all of that free time now at home, to answer all of your wonderful questions. Make sure your questions for your interviews are also relevant, but if you don't know if your questions are good for your interview, what should you do? Yay, ask me, email them to me, and I'll say yes, or I don't like this, or change this, or whatever. All right. Use people you know to find an expert. So if you know somebody who's got a relative that's a nurse, or you know somebody that's a special education teacher, like my cousin works in special education, so she works with children that are blind and deaf. All right, so I'm happy to ask her if you want to ask, you know, interview her, do stuff like that. If you want me to try and find some other people through her as well, if you want to do special needs, I can try and find somebody that way. Use the people you know, branch out to try and find experts, because sometimes just emailing random people can be a little bit difficult, but as soon as you put somebody's name in there, it can make them feel a little bit more obligated to answer your questions, okay? Pressure them, just put your thumb on them, all right? Ask me questions, conduct thorough research, don't give up, all right? Even if you don't get your draft in by the 7 weeks, keep chipping away at it, especially in the holidays. You're going to be like doing a lot of Netflix chilling, but making sure that maybe, you know, half a day can be dedicated every 2 or 3 days, maybe an hour every 2 or 3 days, just chipping away. Okay. Check your emails maybe every morning. All right, see if anybody gets back to you. And keep a record of all of your references. So have a specific page of your references so that you don't lose them. I think these are exactly the same as what we went through just before. Okay, so what we would start with, ideally, is like a mind map or a flow chart of some sort, okay, just to record a bunch of different topics you're interested in. Do pick things that you're interested in. If you do want to sort of look at things that you think might be easy, that is something you could do, but do also do topics that you're interested in. So Sarah's not here at the moment, but she might have picked something to do with child psychology, okay? If you're particularly looking at a career in early childhood, maybe you could pick something that has something to do with that, okay? Maybe if you've got siblings or cousins or know somebody that's got special needs and you're interested about that, maybe you could go down that path. If you are looking at the health of children in terms of nutrition, go down that path as well, okay? And record your ideas. So that's the very first thing that we are going to do today. And then you work through your investigation question, identifying the area of study. We come up with focus questions. That's part of our planning. All right, and that's pretty much my PowerPoint. What I want to do now is show you this. It's in your day map, but we'll go through it now. It's called your Child Studies Assessment Advice. So this is coming from SACE, right? So this is from, okay, this is from all the investigations from 2019, SACE has collated some advice. Okay, so if you scroll all the way down to the bottom and look at external assessment investigation, SACE has identified a list of things. They've identified what the more successful students have done, the students that have done well, the students that have gotten really good grades, what have they done to ensure that they've got good grades, and they've also identified things that people have done that didn't necessarily do as successfully. That didn't make sense, but go on. All right, so the people that were more successful, people that got good grades, people that were able to do a more thorough investigation, referenced relevant sections in the introduction. So when you do your introduction, you do need to base it off of some research, okay? So what is the current research talking about that has led you to this question? What is happening right now? What is it that is interesting you? I need to go to bed. All right, so you do need to use research for your investigation. The next thing, they provide methodologies. We're going to go through that. You would have done that in your research task, but that is literally just talking about how you were going to go about your investigation. What primary sources are you using? What secondary sources are you using? Are there going to be any potential bias in there? How is your investigation going to go? All right, so they've been very thorough through that methodology, but that's something we'll go through at a later date. Their question is focused on the health and well-being of children. That is a box that needs to be ticked. So you must relate to the health and well-being or well-being of children, okay? Must tick that box. They explain why the selected topic is an issue or trend and how it links to the area of study. So they don't just say, this question relates to area of study too, because they then go because blah, 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 and they use research to say that, okay? They formulate well-constructed focus questions. So your focus questions shouldn't just be random. They should help you actually answer your overall question. I do have some exemplars of some investigations with some really well-structured focus questions and some less structured focus questions that we'll go through, and I'll give you maybe some homework to read through 2 different investigations and you can see a little bit of the difference. All right, I'll probably only have them up for a short time and then I'll take them back down. So formulate, focus questions. They define the scope of the topic and give good direction and insight into what is to come. Okay, so they're explaining what the investigation is going to go through, what your intended outcome of the investigation is, what are you hoping to find out. They analyse and interpret within the body of investigation results, outcomes, and conclusions that were drawn from surveys and graphs. Okay, so making sure that when you get your results back from your surveys, you're actually using them throughout the body of discussion. You're actually referencing to the images, you're including an appendix, all that sorts of stuff. You're not just putting in the statistics and not talking about them. You have to do both. You have to actually talk about how is this information that you've collected relevant to your investigation? What does it tell you? What conclusions are you making? Is there any bias in it? Is it going to be really relevant? Did you only get 10 people answer your survey? So maybe this isn't the most accurate viewpoint. All right, they've used factual research and they've used credible resources. They've kept it relevant to Australia, okay, making sure that we are not really talking about American information or UK information, or making sure that it's Australian because it needs to be relevant, okay, Australia, relevant. They evaluate throughout the investigation, okay, as well as in the conclusion. So that's when you are talking about your data that you've collected. Perhaps after each focus question, you make a short conclusion about how that relates to your overall investigation, so that by the time you get to your conclusion, you've already talked about a few different things and it's just a short, sharp and shiny overall, this is what I found out, okay? All right, less successful people, it's not as long of a list, so that's all right. They don't address bias in their sources, which we will talk about a little bit more. They do not include the qualifications or identify the area of expertise of their primary sources. So in your methodology, where you identify who you're interviewing or your surveys, you need to talk about whether or not what their qualifications are, why are they an expert in their field, why have you chosen them for your interview, okay? Not just because they were the only people that you could access, but why did you choose to interview a psychologist? Why did you choose to interview a nurse? How are they relevant to your investigation? They addressed topics which were not appropriate to the defined age group. So maybe they talked about adolescents or adults. They presented statistics within paragraphs. All right, so that might look like, 80% of respondents in my survey said this. You can actually do that, represent your data in tables and in graphs to save words, okay? So then you would say, in reference to table 1, blah, 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 the participants, etc., etc. All right, so we'll go through that a little bit more on how you use visual data throughout your investigation to save words, but making sure that you are actually trying to do that. We'll do a lesson on that as well. They included statistics but didn't analyse or interpret them. So again, there's an investigation that I want us to look at where students just put in tables and they haven't actually referenced them at all. They haven't actually talked about it at all. They included surveys that were not relevant to the topic and provided no meaningful data. So that is when you are coming up with interview or survey questions. Have me look over them. Flick them through me to an email, be like, look, I'm planning on sending out a survey tomorrow. These are my questions. Do you think that they're good for my overall topic? Because some of your questions might not give you any valuable data. You might not be able to actually use it for anything, and it's just a waste. They're focused on a one-sided argument instead of looking at the two sides of the argument. They include mostly American or English data and assume that it applies to Australian culture. They did not reference appropriately or produce large sections of work without any acknowledgement to sources. So some pretty obvious things in there, like referencing or maybe keeping it relevant to Australia. But it is always important to just have a look through what SACE is identified as being good and as being bad. So just keeping that in the back of your mind when it comes to writing your investigation and planning your investigation. It is going to be in DAMAP all the time if you ever need to access it again. But for today, for the rest of the lesson, I would like you to just start brainstorming things that interest you, maybe things that are contemporary. So if that's maybe you accessing a bunch of different like news websites, like what the project, Nine News, ABC. Maybe you could look up some articles that have to do with children, child development school, children's health, anything of the sort. Just start doing a little bit of research today, and hopefully by the end of the lesson we might be able to pop some things up on the board. Does that sound okay?